Been here for a couple hours just doing some odds and ends. The biggest thing is I hooked the steering wheel up incorrectly, and back here there's a aluminum bushing, I guess you could call it, and in between the aluminum bushing and the locking thing here should be a nylon or a Teflon washer, and I put it in the other way. I put the Teflon washer inside of the bushing, so unfortunately I had to take the whole steering column off to fix that, but I didn't want to bore you with that. I also tried to get a rubber grommet into here, and that's a heavy duty hunk of wire in there, and the rubber grommet that I have has got a pretty wide mouth on it, but it's still not playing. Now what I'm going to do is try to hook the heater fan in, and I tested it real quick and it comes up and spools up just fine. This is the original Dorothy one here. It's got this Smith sign, and you can see that the motor's not really all that pretty, but there's little Smith stuff on here that I didn't want to paint over, so I left it. But it works, so you know, there's that, of course. The real pain about this is these holes, this hole here, and then the holes back here. The clutch, or excuse me, the tachometer and the speedometer cables run through those. They each get grommeted, and they come out essentially from the instrument panel through the holes back there, if you can see on either end of the big hole, grommets, through here, grommets, and then the speedometer goes down inside the transmission tunnel, goes back to the gear drive that is over there, if you can see that on the transmission, and then obviously the tachometer just plugs right in here into the distributor. Those grommets are the typical 1-inch grommets. Let me get that out real quick and show you. So the grommets are just these typical 1-inch grommets, and I think these holes are 3 inches, I think is what they're supposed to be. Here's the speedometer cable. There's one end. There's the other end. And it's knurled. So that poor little 3-inch hole has got to go around that. Now I tried this before, and I ripped the hell out of probably 3 or 4 of these things. Now I got a pretty big stash here, and I don't think I really need too many more of these. I got some older tachometer cables in here, so I'm going to give it a shot and see if I can't get these to go through and then get the heater mounted. But I know from reading the forums and everything like that that this is a real pain in the rear. So hot water, try to heat it up, try to keep it malleable, and a lot of lubrication, all that stuff, we'll see. Unfortunately, I brought the wrong heater box over. They had a design change between the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 that I'll show you later. It's not really that important. And so I've started to put the dash in and going to start wiring that up. This is not really exciting. It's just following the wiring diagram and wiring it up properly. I'm going to do all the electrical switches and all that kind of stuff so I can have stuff at least electrically sound so that I can test it. And but still semi-temporary. But I'm not going to bore you with looking at this wiring diagram and then plugging wires into switches and things like that. So when I get a little bit further here, I'll give you an update. A lot of stuff has gotten wired up. Battery cables, the starter solenoid, unfortunately, the old one, the terminal posts are getting a little beat up, and I don't have. I want to try to save that, so I don't know if I can take it apart or what, and replace the terminal posts or whatever. Anyway, one of the most important things, I think, especially for these old cars, you read on the forums a lot that somebody's horn's not working, or one turn signal turns and the other doesn't, and all this kind of stuff. I am heartily convinced that the vast majority of all those problems are ground. Car electrical distribution system works a little bit different than what we might be in tune with, especially in our house. And essentially, you want the chassis, any bare metal point on the car, to be ground. Any switch that operates, any light that lights, any horn that beeps, anything like that has to have a return path to ground. If that return path is obstructed or at a high resistance, you're not going to have current flow. So you can have perfectly situated wires, everything looks good, but if for whatever reason that ground return path is messed up, it's not going to work. That goes for starting the car, all sorts of stuff. So in here, and you probably can't see it too well, but in here and going down into the transmission on the clutch housing, that's the ground to tie the motor to the chassis. And the reason that needs to be done is because the motor's rubberly. The motor is on rubber mounts, so both forward and then the transmission is on a rubber mount in the back. So there's no easy electrical connection through chassis ground to the motor. And obviously the motor's not even going to turn over, let alone start, because this big heavy wire here goes down to the starter. So if you don't have the path for return current, the motor's not going to start. So this cable here is going to come from the battery. This cable here goes to the starter. The coil obviously needs to get wired up, but that goes down. So essentially what I'm doing now is I'm just going around and I'm checking all my ground points. So I got my multimeter here. I got the little buzzer thing on that I showed you guys before. Right here, which you can't see. How about right here? Yeah, you can see that. So this is one of the bolts for the master cylinder. The bolt goes into the threading of the car, so that should be at ground. So I should be able to touch anywhere on the chassis that's bare metal and get a beep. So you can hear that. So that tells me that I've got current flow from wherever that is through the chassis, which you would expect, to ground. Now one thing I want to make sure is I've got the chassis connected to the motor, right, through this braided ground strap. So I'm going to touch somewhere on the motor. I'm going to touch not on the wire itself, because the wire is going from here into the transmission. If I touch the wire itself, well, of course it's going to be grounded. So I don't want to touch the wire, but I'm going to go from a bolt here on the brake master cylinder to some random bolt on the transmission cover. Alright, and you can hear that beep. That means that I've got continuity from the chassis to the motor, and that's a good thing. A couple other things I've got to check. You got a bunch of ground wires down there on the steering box. That's what allows the horn to return. I got to make sure that that's a good connection. There's connections in the back for the tail lights and all that. That's the return to ground. They don't run wires all the way back and things like that. A little bit more theory, and then I'll shut up. One of the reasons they do that is because if you don't have a return path and use the chassis as your return path, every switch has got to have another wire run to return that current to the battery, or if the car is running to the generator. You want to save money, right? You want to make it a little bit more easy. You've only got half the number of wires if you can use the chassis of the car as your grounding point. So while you might run short black wires out to a chassis point like they do in the very back, you don't want to have to run wires all the way back to a huge congregating thing. That's how your house is wired up. Everything comes back to your breaker box in your house. Everything comes back. The house itself, there's no such thing as a chassis ground that I know of anyway on a house. Cars, on the other hand, obviously are made different. So I'm just going to go around and touch random points that I know or that I'm concerned that I've got a good contact to ground, and just listen for buzzes. Just going around and testing various things. At the back of the car, obviously, I'm going to test the fuel sender, and I kind of may have already tested it before I embarrassed myself on camera and not had it not work. Zoom in here for you. There's a fuel gauge. Got the fuel sender back here. I took it out of the gas tank. And again, it's just resistance. So I'm going to simulate that the tank is full of gas. And hopefully you can see that needle going up. The wiper motor also works. The starter will click. I got the, let me show you. Got the power supply sitting in there. It's drawn about 1/10 of an amp or so, just kind of sitting there. The wiper motor works when I turn it on. Unfortunately, the little eyelet of this was torn and I didn't notice it, and I tightened it down and it cracked. Not that I could have done anything in repair. Because this thing only puts out about 5 amps, the solenoid will click, which is cool. And let's see, I don't seem to have, the lights aren't working. The bulbs for the little idiot lights are not the same bulbs as were stock, so there's no way for me to really test those because I don't have any. But the dash lights aren't working, And unfortunately, that's really all I can test because I don't have any other electrical stuff. The horn. So the horn clicks, but it doesn't beep. So I guess I'm going to take the wires off of one of these horns and use the power supply and see if I can make it beep directly. But this is the little horn relay in there. That's clicking, and I checked out my ground. Like I said, ground's an important thing. I checked it all the way out from the essentially from the horn button all the way out, and I've got a solid ground. So I'll play with that a little bit more. But some of the testing so far is going good. This is the wire that I routed through. I had mentioned that they had an extension wire for the thermostat when they moved the sender over here. So I got a little splice, so I don't have to splice wire, though I still may splice it and wrap it in shrink wrap, solder it and everything, and do it upright. And then I saved the heat shrink that was on there to try to protect it from a little bit of heat, though I'll probably get more of that. And routed that through, and that seemed to be okay. But I don't have a spade on that, so I don't have that connected up yet. Let's see. That's about it. I got the battery charging over there, so be afraid. I don't know if it's going to take a charge. The thing I bought it the day or two after I got the car, so it's definitely probably outside of its warranty. I went pretty cheap. But I have no intention on starting the car today. I've got to get the distributor out, get it lubricated, get that oil primed and everything. I actually want to get some Marvel Mystery oil inside the cylinders because it's been a long time, too long, since I've turned the motor over. So we're just going to kind of continue to play with some of the electrical stuff, and then that'll probably be it for the day. I did a couple more things, mainly off camera. The one hole that you see left here in the dash, that is for the windshield washer pump. That's a little manual pump on these guys. It's not an electric one. Again, creature comforts. I also put the choke and the heater in, the heater valve, the cabling for those. But I didn't, the choke is not set in there, it's just sitting in there. It's not definitely ready at all. I've got all that linkage needs to get adjusted and all that stuff. I will show you something real quick here in a second, but all the wiring's done. I didn't figure anything else out as far as the lights go. The only little hiccup here is this is the choke cable, and there's no little clip in here for the choke cable button to work, so I'm not quite sure what's up with that. Yeah, one more thing about the wiper motor. Looking at the schematic, I don't think it's supposed to turn without the ignition on. So it turning no matter what position the key is in is not right, I don't think. So that's telling me something's off there. I got to figure that out. And yeah, let me show you a little trick with putting one of these rubber grommets in, something that I learned in the Navy. Obviously you see there the windshield wiper motor again, like this thing will never die. What I've got here in my hand are two rubber grommets. The one on the left I picked up from Rimmer quite a while ago, and the one on the right, if I remember correctly, the same exact part number, the one on the right I picked up from Spitbits a very long time ago, probably 4+ years ago. I can't speak to the fact that Spitbits still puts those grommets out, but you can see the penetration in this guy over here is really small as compared to that guy over there. This guy here wouldn't really do anything except protect from chafing. This one here provides a little bit of obviously chafing protection and also moisture protection for random drops getting in there. But what I'm going to do now is put the grommet on these wires for the windshield wiper motor, and then put the grommet in, and that's where I want to show you something called an orange stick. So I'm going to get this grommet in. What I got here is what's called an orange stick. Now this is plastic, some are wood, but instead of using a piece of metal that can tear up the rubber or the paint or anything like that, you use this piece of plastic. So one end is like a spade, and the other end is like a rounded spade almost. You can get them where they're pointy, you can get them circular at the end. There's a couple different variations of it, but we use this for soldering, for cleaning up soldering. That's why I say I learned it in the Navy. I'm sure there's other uses, obviously. Get the grommet started here. Start it in a position that's easy to work. Now that I've got it kind of started, use the flat end of the orange stick and just press on the inner diameter and help me work it around. All right, and just like that. So it doesn't totally remove the fear of cutting into the rubber, but it definitely is not as bad as using a hunk of metal. So again, an orange stick. I picked it up at Amazon. It was a couple bucks for several of them.